Tom's been courageous reporter there in the front line.
Really?
He held up well. Absolutely.
Great article on Don. Everybody said it's a program. I can't wait to read the book.
One is not an expert on Nicaragua after spending 7 days there, but you know enough to understand that much of what the media and the president have been talking about is absolutely untrue. These are people who suffered for 45 years under a terrible dictatorship, and they're fighting back, and they're trying to build a society where people can live decently. It's a very strange feeling meeting with the leadership of the government. You meet with a guy like Thomas Borge, who has the unenviable distinction of probably, they call him the most tortured man in the world. You're talking to a guy now who's the Minister of Interior, who was held prisoner by Somoza, was tortured horribly. Daniel Ortega, who spent 8 years in jail fighting for his country's freedom. All of them have been in jail. Many of them have been tortured. The overwhelming thing that comes out from them is not an anti-capitalism, but a sense of nationalism. For many, many years, their country was dominated and overrun by American interests, and now they want to stand on their own 2 feet and be a free and independent people. And I think that they're entitled to it. That's basically what it comes down to. They are trying to run their own society in their own way. Their leadership are intelligent people. They are not, to quote Ronald Reagan, Looney Tune characters. Many of the things that we saw were impressive. They're building hospitals. They're building schools. They're educating their children. There's a tremendous sense of energy. You go to the hospitals and the people are proud. You ask the people, and I knocked on many doors. I just went all around and stopped people and you ask them, are you with the government or not? And they kind of laugh. They don't quite understand what you're talking about. Of course they're with the government. I have to say, though, that Ronald Reagan is succeeding in many ways. What he wants to do, of course, through the war and through the embargo, is to destroy their economy. And he's having that impact. You knock on doors and you talk to people, and the cost of goods is going up. And people are feeling that, and they're hurting. And that's having an impact on the society. The war effort, the having to fight against the countries, is taking away tremendous resources, which they would rather be using for education and for their people. And that's hurting them, too. The other thing, I think, the last thing that I would say at this time, and I've been on the plane for 14 hours, so I'm a little tired, is it is totally amazing that, considering the fact they are now fighting a war supported and financed by the United States government, the lack of anti-Americanism, and in fact the affection and fondness for the American people is amazing. This is, of course, the first time that I've been to Central America. But Central America is America. They are Americans. They play baseball, they play basketball, they watch the same stupid American television programs that we watch. You feel a real kinship for these people, and they want to be part of us. And the second thing is, they want Americans to come down and see their country. You can go any place you want. You can talk to anybody that you want to talk to. Now, I'm sure the Nicaraguan government is not perfect. They acknowledge that they have made many mistakes. They have made many mistakes. But they are not afraid to have people come down. One should understand why it is that the President of the United States does not want you to go down, wants to break relationships with them. And they say, please come down. You can go any place you want. One might understand or try to figure out what the motives of the President are. Okay, thank you very much.
Anything new did...
I just came back from a 14-hour trip, so
Bernie, there's been some question, though, about you being completely uncritical. Is there anything at all that you would say?
Yeah, that's enough for tonight. I'll have more to say on it.
When will you have more to say?
You should get up there with the mic, though.
Yeah, a country of 3 million people, poor people, are certainly a military threat to a nation of 230 million people with the largest and most powerful military force on the world. You tell me that they are a military threat to the United States.
Bernie, Burlington's sister city is inhabited largely by
They're being jerks. Okay, before we go on the record, I appreciate going off the record for a minute. I think I can honestly say I could talk about Nicaragua and my experiences in Nicaragua for 3 or 4 hours. I'm not going to do that. You can all feel relieved. I don't intend to do that this afternoon. The concern that I have is that the issue of Nicaragua is an enormously complicated issue. The internal affairs of Nicaragua are complicated. The United States' relationship to Nicaragua is complicated. And on top of that, I am not an expert in the issue. 7 days in Nicaragua has not made me an expert. What I am prepared to do, to the best of my ability, which has some real limitations, is to meet and talk with any reporter in the state of Vermont at length about any concern that he or she might have. But at this press conference, I am not going to go into every single area of my trip. There is one area that I want to concentrate on right now, today. And any time in the near future, or any time that people would like to ask me any other question and sit down and go through it at length, I would be happy to do that. But it cannot be done in 20 seconds on the television screen. It really can't. It's not fair. And that's one of the problems that we have. Again, off the record, one of the things that I have been just tremendously concerned about is the whole question of the national, international media coverage. I don't know if people saw the New York Times today. On the front page of the New York Times, there was an article, U.S. said to have waged raid on training camp in Nicaragua. I believe they were talking about last Wednesday, having bombed Nicaragua. This report today is totally typical of everything that happens. They quote, it's a leak from the Reagan administration going through the lengths, 2 little paragraphs saying Nicaragua denies that it's terrorist. No one bothered to ask the United Nations, our allies around the world opinion in this article. What do you think about the unilateral right of the United States of America to bomb the invasion of Nicaragua? No discussion of that. Basically, it is assumed, of course, the United States believes that there is a terrorist there. The United States has the unilateral right to bomb it, and that's the story. And those over and over again, that is what happens. And it's really a cause of great concern, I think. So, again, to reiterate, it is a complicated issue. I am prepared to sit down at length with any reporter to answer any questions to the best of my knowledge, understanding that my knowledge in a lot of areas is very limited. But today, you have the statement. It's a 4-page statement, and I would like to go through the statement and answer questions relative to that statement. I guess the first point that I want to make is that my primary purpose in going to Nicaragua was not to determine in all of 7 days how good or bad the Nicaraguan government is, or this or that nuance of Nicaraguan policy. I am not an expert on Nicaragua. My major concern, and I feel this very, very seriously, is that I believe that there is a very real possibility that the United States of America is about to enter into a Vietnam-type war in Central America. I think that such a war would not only be a disaster for the Nicaraguan people, which it certainly would be, but a disaster for the people of the United States as well. Others may disagree with me, but I do not believe it is in the interest of the people of our country to have young men and women from Burlington, Vermont, from the state of Vermont, from any city or town in the United States, fighting and dying in the jungles of Central America. This is especially true when the government we will be fighting appears to have the support of the vast majority of the people of Nicaragua. In Central America and throughout the Third World, there is poverty and despair, the likes of which most people in our own nation simply are not familiar with. I was not familiar with it. Close to 1 billion people a year throughout the Third World are suffering from hunger. In Nicaragua, one goes around all areas of the country and sees people living in hovels, in shacks with dirt floors. Incredible poverty. And Nicaragua is certainly not the poorest nation in the world. It is in this context that we must understand the plight and the struggle of the Nicaraguan people. For 45 years, the Nicaraguan people suffered and labored under the tyranny and brutality of the Somoza dictatorship, a dictatorship supported by the United States government. In my view, the Nicaraguan people must be accorded the right and respect to develop and secure their own future and retain their own sovereignty. There are many people throughout the world who believe that the Sandinista government has made some very significant improvements for the people of Nicaragua in such vital areas as healthcare, education, agriculture, land reform, and the distribution of food. I am one of those people. I think significant progress has been made in a number of areas. They have also, in my view, gone a long way in extending democratic rights to a country which has no democratic history. One cannot look at a country out of context. 45 years of a brutal dictatorship does not lead to liberal democracy overnight. There are some people, obviously, in the United States and throughout the world who disagree with the assertions that the Sandinista government has been effective or done a good job. Disagreement over the pros and cons of the Sandinista government of Nicaragua is fine. In our country, we cherish open debate and discussion and different points of view. But just because the present United States government's administration and some members of Congress disagree with the policies of the government of Nicaragua does not, in my view, give our government the right to unilaterally destroy their government or any other government in this world. Just because we are the most powerful military nation in the world, and just because Nicaragua is very poor and very weak, it's a country of 3 million people, that does not give us the unilateral right to overthrow their government or any other government. Many of us in the United States are outraged that a large superpower like the Soviet Union has taken it upon itself the right to undermine the sovereignty of Afghanistan by brutal military intervention. It should not be our goal to imitate Soviet foreign policy by brazenly seeking to overthrow a government we may not like, which, by the way, happens to be one of the few democratically elected governments in Central America. This is not a question of whether this government is doing our bidding or is to our liking, but rather it is a challenge to the most fundamental and precious of American values, the rights of people to freely choose their own form of government. It should be pointed out to Americans that our policy of unilateral intervention is meeting widespread disapproval from nations throughout the world, including many of our allies. Canada, under the conservative government of Prime Minister Mulroney, has just recently concluded a trade agreement with Nicaragua. France has for a long time urged the United States away from its policies regarding Nicaragua, and most recently expressed its strong opposition to the most recent United States threats toward Nicaragua. Many of our allies have repeatedly asked the United States to alter its policies. In the United Nations, in the World Court, the position of the United States that has the right to intervene unilaterally is not meeting widespread approval. Ultimately, for better or for worse, it must be the Nicaraguan people who decide their own future, not the government of the United States. We cannot determine the governments of nations throughout the world. We cannot do that. Basically, in order to prevent the tragedy of another Vietnam, it is my view that we must move very rapidly in the diplomatic area. One does not have to be an expert in international relations to understand that if there is no discussion or communication between two nations who are in a relationship of crisis proportions, the likelihood of war and tragedy and death is greatly enhanced. The New York Times today reported that the United States seriously considered bombing Nicaragua last week with United States planes. That is an act of war. It was extremely disturbing to me that I, the mayor of a small New England city, was the highest-ranking elected or appointed American official to attend last week's celebrations and to meet with high-ranking Nicaraguan government officials. In my discussions with President Ortega, I received a distinct impression that he is prepared to meet with President Reagan at any time, in any place, in an attempt to resolve the outstanding differences between the two countries. I appeal to the President of the United States that before we bomb or invade this tiny little nation, please sit down and talk to these people. Do not commit this nation to a course of action and a war that future generations may lament for years to come. God only knows what kind of role I, the mayor of a small city, can play in this process. I expect not much. but I intend within the next few days to send a letter to President Reagan and Secretary of State Schultz and President Ortega and Foreign Minister D'Escoto urging such a meeting. Thank you.
Give me a drink of water. Pat, can you get me a glass of water or something?
Taking questions now?
Yes. But give me about 2 seconds, please. I don't know. I'm not feeling 100% well. My throat's dry.
Water down there.
I think I am suffering the results of a famous North American disease. So if you see me darting out of this room very quickly, do not take it personally.
So were you sick while you were down there?
Queasy would be a better feeling, but I was not immobilized. I held up better than many. Thanks. Of course, when I left, I took about half of the supply of dried fruit. If you've been having trouble getting little packages of dried fruit in Burlington, it's all in Nicaragua right now. Okay, any questions? I'd be happy to. Here's some more if people don't have.
The lieutenant governor is among those who have criticized the fact that you were in Nicaragua criticizing the United States government. You, a U.S. official, or officials in
I'm not a U.S. official.
Right, an official of the United States. How would you respond to those criticisms?
Okay, you know, I take seriously, maybe I'm one of the few public officials in the United States who still take seriously that we are, in fact, a free nation. And that's what freedom means. We make fun of the Soviet Union that when Soviet officials make a policy, nobody disagrees with that policy. That is what totalitarianism is about. President Reagan has established a policy. I strongly disagree with it. I think that forget being a public official. As an American citizen, I and any other American citizen has the right to voice disagreement over that policy. I do not believe that that is unpatriotic. I think that that's what America is about.
Another thing that Smith called for was for you to disclose the sources of your funding. He said,
Sure, you got it. You got it. The sources of my funding was that I was a guest of the Nicaraguan government while I was in Nicaragua. They paid my hotel bill. And a number of meals that I had, probably $15 worth of meals. And the rest of the money is out of my own bank accounts, about $600 or $700, not very complicated. Was the implication that this was part of the overall communist conspiracy?
I don't know what the implication was.
Okay, that's
what he said.
the sources of my funding. That's about it.
There was a lot of criticism years ago about how specifically Sandinistas, genocidal attacks on Mosquito Indians. You were in Puerto Mesa where many of those Indians were relocated to. What is the sentiment there?
Okay, this is again, Alex, an issue. To use the word genocidal is absolutely incorrect. But this is an issue itself, a very complicated issue within a complicated issue. I think all that I can say at this time regarding that particular policy, of which I am not an expert, I'm not here to defend it. I think there are people in the Nicaraguan government who had problems, who disagree with what happened there at that time. But again, that in itself, the mosquito question on the Atlantic coast is a complicated question. I would be happy. There are people in Burlington, by the way, who know more about it than I do. I mean, Nancy Powell is somebody who was down in Puerto Cabezas for at least several weeks. I won't get into that at great length at this moment.
Bernie, we were talking to people around town and see some of the questions voters had. One issue was if your constituency in Burlington, did they support your trip fully, and were they in agreement with your observations?
I'm sorry, I missed the thrust of that question.
Were they, your supporters, were they your constituency in support of the trip, and did they agree with your observations of the Nicaraguan government?
I don't know. You know, my own gut feeling is that politically what I have done is not a particularly popular thing to do. When you have the President of the United States criticizing Nicaragua, and somebody goes there as the guest of the Nicaraguan government, I think politically it is not perceived as something, a very wise thing to do for a budding politician. But as I indicated today, I think the issue of war and peace is so very important that I will do what little I can to try to prevent that.
Do you think some of your supporters have said that there may be times when you're reluctant to criticize the government because you think the issue of war and peace or the threat of the United States is more serious, is so much more serious that you're afraid that to talk, for example, about the Indians might obscure that.
Well, it's not
Is that the case?
No, it's not the case. The case is that what we learned from the New York Times today is that the United States almost went to war with the people of Nicaragua last week. That's pretty important. The issue of the Mosquito Indians within Nicaragua is also very important, also very complicated, and I have to tell you, I am not an expert. What I can tell you is that people in Nicaragua themselves, high-ranking officials, think that they did not do, perhaps, the right thing in the right way at that time, and if given the chance, might do it differently this time. The word genocide is nonsense. I think no serious person would use that word regarding that policy. It is a complicated issue. They are living right on the border of Honduras. There is right now a major CIA effort to undermine that region. It's not easy, and I'm not an expert, but I am not here, and I trust you understand this. I am not here to defend every action of the Nicaraguan government.
On the other hand, Bernie, you are in a position because of your relative influence down there, because you were one of the only American officials down there, to talk with these people about these kinds of things. When you're talking about 100,000 people, as you said, it's not insignificant. And you, for example, when you came off the plane, praised Thomas Voorhees. And Indians say that he just recently said that they, if they didn't submit to the Sandinista position, that they were ready to shoot.
Those are Indians who are at war with the Sandinista government, and one might want to... Again, that's an issue. I'm sorry. I'm not going to get into that today. Anytime you would like to sit down, I will do my best. I can't do it today.
But you didn't talk with government officials about the Indian issue?
Sure I did. I mean, a little bit, yes. Yeah, I did. I mean, not at great lengths, but I did.
Did you express concern?
Other questions?
Bernie, before anybody usually goes on a trip, they have some kind of expectations. Were any of those met? Or what do you expect?
Again, if one understands, I mean, I get criticized by the editors of my friendly newspaper here that, I was fooled or duped or I'm not an expert. I am not an expert. I don't think I was duped. I think nobody will deny, nobody who you speak to, Senator Leahy or anybody else, will deny that when you get to Nicaragua, you have total access. You can go any place you want to go. I was able to go any place that I wanted to go. I was able, given the limitations of my Spanish, I had a translator, to talk to anybody. To me, the experience was very exciting. Do I think I got all sides of the story and talked to everybody? Am I an expert? The answer is no. But I learned a great deal. Yes, it fulfilled my expectations.
On the sister city, what did you find that the people there needed most?
Okay.
And what is it that you propose that the city of Burlington now do?
Okay. One aspect, what is going on in Nicaragua, and where and again, what has to be understood is the economic problems of Nicaragua are not unique in Central America or in the Third World. In fact, as poor as Nicaragua is, one of the nice things that I saw is that as a result of government policy, direct government policy in terms of the distribution of food, people are not hungry by and large. I think it's fair to say. It's funny, sometimes American journalists talk about how bad a country is because people are lining up for food. That's a good thing. In other countries, people don't line up for food. The rich get the food and the poor starve to death. In Nicaragua, people are not starving to death. One of the goals of the Reagan administration is very clearly to cause discontent in Nicaragua through the war, which is draining Nicaraguan resources, and through the embargo and other financial mechanisms. So you go around and you talk to people, whether it's in Puerto Cabezas or elsewhere. In Puerto Cabezas, for example, they have a hospital. I mean, it's hard to define it as a hospital in terms of the United States. It is wood. It is clean, but extremely primitive. The equipment that they have is extremely primitive. When the governor there of the region, Myrna Cunningham, tells me that they have just expanded an area, added a lot more beds, but they can't complete the project because they're unable to get the lumber that they need because the lumbering area is in the heart of Contra territory and people who go out get killed. They cannot complete a hospital because of Contra activity. They are unable to get medical equipment that they desperately need for their people because of United States activity. I spoke to a very interesting man, the mayor of Managua. And this guy sits there and he says, we need 150,000 units of housing in Managua alone. And believe me, he was not kidding. If you go around Managua, you see shack after shack, people living in dirt floors. They need the housing, they want to build the housing. And he says that in the last year or two, because of the war, so much of their resources are going into the war effort that they don't have the ability to provide what they need. The prices of basic necessities are going up. You knock on a door and you talk to somebody, and you say, how are things going? And they say, things are going okay, but the prices of material is becoming too expensive. Okay? Again, not only a problem of Nicaragua, it's a problem of El Salvador, it's a problem of the entire third world. Small countries which are exporting commodities are not getting. It costs them that much more for sugar as opposed to tractors or as opposed to oil. They're all being hurt. But that's what they were telling us on Puerto Cabezas, that they need medical supplies, they need books. There was a special concern that some people addressed to me in a meeting that we had about the desire to have the kids, the Creole children, maintain their English identity. So they want teachers and programs that could teach the children English.
What do you intend to suggest that the people of Burlington do to address those problems?
Okay, when I was down there, I gave a small amount of money that was privately collected from the United States to people in Puerto Cabezas for medical supplies and other needs. I will encourage us to continue that effort and try to get basic human needs supplies down there.
How much did you do?
I gave $300 and $100 of my own money, $300 that we had collected.
In the past, a lot of demonstrations that we've had in town here against the embargo and then the breaking of the embargo. You haven't showed up personally for whatever reason, I don't know, and frequently send a statement to be read, and perhaps maybe keeping your distance on some of these things, or the GE demonstration, not being a participant in playing the mayor of the city. I wonder, is there any chance of you changing your involvement in those kinds of protests?
I am deeply involved in many things. The fact that I don't go to every demonstration does not suggest that I am not deeply involved. I am going to work. I mean, I think it's a very strange thing, and maybe I'm a little bit presumptuous, which has been suggested about me in general. But having recently met with Ortega, I am going to do, and having the deep felt feeling that he wants to sit down and talk. And as I indicated earlier, before you bomb a country, you should at least communicate with these people. I will do my best in that level to try to bring together some discussion. And if President Reagan or Secretary of State Schultz refuses to sit down with those people, I think the American people maybe have to draw some conclusions from that kind of behavior.
When was the last time Ortega said he heard from the U.S. government officially?
Well, they had heard from, when I was there, I mean, I don't know the actual answer to that. When I was there, as a matter of fact, I think in the middle of the week on Wednesday or Thursday, I don't know exactly, the United States had delivered to Ortega, as a matter of fact, personally, I think, a very, very harsh note. I don't know how much publicity it got in this country, but the note basically said that we believe that we are going to hold Nicaragua responsible for any terrorist activity that takes place in Central America against American civilians. Presumably, if the next day some American, dropped dead of a disease, Nicaragua could be bombed because of that. That was the tone of that statement. So at least he had heard from them on that day. I don't know. Yeah.
And Bernie,
Yeah.
what they're trying to do is on one level forcibly redistribute the wealth down in Nicaragua. And one of the things which the Reagan administration touts as a major problem is the lack of freedoms. Freedoms as we Americans understand them.
Right.
How do you justify your feelings about freedom, your belief that it's the right thing, with a conscientious social policy which is designed to...
Two things. But the most important thing is what I believe, in my view, or what President Reagan believes about Nicaragua really is not the issue. For example, if we're concerned about human freedom, we should be talking about Pinochet of Chile. The United States embraces Pinochet. He is a mass murderer who overthrew democracy. Stroessner of Paraguay entertained Nazis, according Mendeley, down there for years and years. Duvalier, some of you may have read in the paper the other day. Haiti is the most economically miserable country on the entire earth. He has made himself ruler for life. Why isn't President Reagan invading Chile if he's interested in democracy and freedom, or Haiti, or Guatemala? In other words, I see that as a totally hypocritical concern. I am, to tell you the truth, a strong believer in civil liberties, and I want to see every country in this world free. I don't see that as a consistent part of American policy. Why suddenly Nicaragua? No, very few people would deny today that Nicaragua is a freer country than it was for 45 years under the Somoza dictatorship. Where was Americans concerned about freedom under Somoza? Where people were tortured and killed by the thousands. Some people say that Nicaragua's election was not perfectly free. I don't know. I mean, there are differences of opinions on that. But certainly I can tell you it was a lot freer than any election they'd ever held before. I asked a man, the editor of the Prensa, for example, who of course is a strong opponent, is a supporter of the Contras, about freedom and democracy. And what he told me, interestingly enough, that if the Contras came to power, he wouldn't guarantee, that's exactly his words, I wouldn't guarantee that Nicaragua would be a free country, that there would be democracy. I think he's right. I think there would be far less freedom, because the Sandinista movement is so strong that it would have to be brutally suppressed, quite like they did in Chile. So in other words, the point is, if somebody says, I am concerned about the lack of democracy, the other thing that I asked them, interesting, I said, tell me about all of Central America. Let's put this in context. Is Nicaragua freer than Guatemala? Yeah, it's freer. Freer than El Salvador? Yeah. He felt that Costa Rica was the freest country in terms of, and maybe he's right. But he himself thought that Nicaragua had more freedom than any other country in Central America other than Costa Rica. So I think all that we're saying is, if the United States, I don't believe, to tell you the truth, that even if a country is not free, and everyone admits it, that you have the right to invade it. If you do that, you're going to be invading about 30 or 40 countries or 50 countries around the world. But the point is, I say that the Reagan administration is totally hypocritical when they talk about their lack of freedom in Nicaragua. Because they want to talk about lack of freedom. There are a lot of countries which have a lot less freedom, which have long been supported by America.
Why is it you think that the Reagan administration is so preoccupied?
Okay, I'll tell you why. I mean, in general, why? The answer is reasonably obvious. The United States government makes a habit of overthrowing governments which are nationalistic, which feel that their major allegiance is to their own people, whether it's Chile, whether it was Guatemala, whether it was the Dominican Republic, or so forth. What the United States is doing in Nicaragua now is totally consistent with a policy of many, many years under many, many presidents. Let's be clear about that. And I think that the sudden preoccupation, obsession with Nicaragua is this, that within all of the misery, economic misery and starvation around the third world, if there are individual countries who can be successful, let's just say, I don't know if they can, but without contra activity, without an embargo, if the nation of Nicaragua was able to provide a decent standard of living for their people, this would be an example to countries all around the continent. They would point and they'd say, hey, why are people starving to death in my country if they're not starving to death in Nicaragua? Why is there a brutal dictatorship in my country if you have democratic rights in Nicaragua? So I think what Reagan wants to destroy is an example of hope, perhaps, for the people of Central America.
There was a lot of sympathy in this country during the Carter administration for the Nicaraguan government, before the Sandinista revolution. What happened?
What happened is that every day, watch the television, every single day on Monday, Nicaragua is a Marxist-Leninist country. Tuesday, Nicaragua is a communist country. Wednesday, Nicaragua is a terrorist country. Thursday, Nicaragua smuggles drugs. Friday, Nicaragua is committing genocide amongst a section of its people. Saturday, the elections had in Nicaragua were a total farce. The government is totalitarian and brutal. Sunday, another story. Monday, you repeat from last week. What outrages me is that on the national television, and this is where I fault the media, they repeat, Reagan gets up, and I give you this example in the New York Times today. President of the United States, well, high-ranking officials say, we intended to bomb, go to war, that's what bombing the country is, against the country of Nicaragua on Wednesday. No discussion around the rest of the world as to what they thought about that. The American people don't even know. I talked to Ortega, and I said, you know, President Ortega, the people in the United States think that your only allies are the Soviet Union and Cuba. And the guy says, I know. You know, he knows what's going on in terms of the press reporting. He says, when I was in Western Europe, what they forgot to report is that he got aid from the Soviet Union, but he also got aid from Western European countries. Canada just entered into a very positive economic program with them, trade program. I gave a press conference with the representative of the French Socialist Party, which is President Mitterrand's country, strongly condemning United States action. The government of Spain, strongly condemning United States action. Governments all over the world. The World Court. You want to hear something? Let me say this. The Nicaraguan people, in many respects, are a very naive people. They keep going to the World Court, which they see as an international tribunal. And you know what? They keep winning. They win in the World Court. And they say, see, we're showing the whole world that we are right and the United States is wrong. They don't know that the United States government doesn't take the World Court seriously. But nobody in America even understands that. They go before the United Nations. Overwhelmingly, the United Nations says what the United States is doing is wrong. But the American people are not even being told that our action, our unilateral right to bomb another country, is meeting widespread condemnation.
How how would you sum up the Reagan administration's actions and their...
The Reagan administration, I give, as I always have, they're very honest. They want to destroy that government. And I'm here today to tell you, I think there is going to be, I think there's a real good chance that there will be a war, an invasion, or the bombing of Nicaragua. They want to destroy the government. That's all. They always did, and they always will. Until that government is destroyed, they will not be happy.
You said they're very honest, but are they lying to the American people with the various propaganda? I mean,
Oh.
are there seeds of truth in, on Monday, it's a communist country, on Tuesday, it's...
For President Ortega to visit the Soviet Union, yeah, I presume presidents of independent nations are allowed to visit the Soviet. What do we need? Is it a totalitarian country? No, it is not a totalitarian country. Are there civil liberties? Yeah, there are civil liberties. Is it a perfectly free country? No, it most certainly is not. Is it freer than most of the countries in Central America? Yeah, it is. Within the context of the misery and the lack of democracy in Central America, it holds up reasonably well. Is the Nicaraguan government always right? The answer is absolutely not. Have they made mistakes? Sure they have. What government, even President Reagan, I suppose. Some of us are concerned about Reagan's policies of cutting programs for the poor and the elderly. Do we think that another nation should bomb us and invade us because of disagreements we have with the Reagan administration's domestic policies?
So do you think that there's a kind of a media conspiracy here, or why do you think that this kind of stuff isn't coming out?
That's a good question, and I honestly don't know the answer. I would say this, but this is off this question. Certainly, the difference between a President Carter. I'll give you an example. Let's talk about freedom. There is a program in Nicaragua which they call Cara el Pueblo, which in Spanish means face the people. Every so often, and I'm sorry that I missed it, because Americans were down, they told me it was unbelievable. Every so often, in this Marxist, Leninist, terrorist, totalitarian country, in quotes, President Ortega and members of his administration call an open meeting in a school, in a town. Anybody who has a question of a concern about the policy of the government, come out and ask it, okay? Ortega is there and people say, why aren't the buses running on time? Why is the cost of food so high? Why does my child have to be in the military? And Ortega is there talking directly to the Nicaraguan people. Now, when is the last time that people in this country have seen President Reagan go out into Harlem to answer questions from the people of Harlem about policies toward black people, have come to Burlington, Vermont to answer our concerns? Reagan doesn't even answer concerns from the media. He doesn't hold once a month, once a year he holds a press conference. My concern, to get back to your question, Debbie, and I don't know the answer why, the problem that President Carter had, and I was no great fan of President Carter, Carter had the naive point of view that you're supposed to have press conferences and answer hard questions. So he gets on television, and he hard question, he babbles, he doesn't know the answer terribly well. Reagan is far beyond that. And the media, in my view, has allowed him every night, watch it. A speech is given, Nicaragua is a terrorist country, bye-bye, thank you. No questions, no comments, we go on to Tuesday night. My criticism is not with Reagan. My criticism is with the national media. And they should tell the President of the United States that until he's going to answer some questions, we don't work for him. We presumably are a free country, and we are intelligent people. We're not going to cover your view unless you answer some questions that we have. But the media has not done that. And again, I point out this New York Times article is one of many, many. This guy who wrote the article could have been a press agent for President Reagan.
If the media is so conservative, as you seem to indicate, they buy the administration line and so on. You called a reporter, they reported the worms. You said network reporters are worms. You reported the same.
Did I say that?
What you reported?
Well, must be correct. Yeah.
If that's true, why are conservatives like Helms and those people on the other side of the fence saying that there's a liberal that...
You know, Bob, again, I've given you my opinion. Obviously, different people disagree, and I know that... can I finish, please?
Sorry.
That I know that conservative people think that CBS is the bulwark of liberalism and communism. You know, what can I tell you? I mean, all that I honestly... watch the television every single night. See how much... It would seem to me, I'm really off the subject, to tell you the truth here, and I don't... And again, my fear was that we were going to go far. I would love to discuss the media's role in Nicaragua. It's a tremendously interesting subject to me, but maybe I should limit that for today and answer it another time. Yes. That is what I did call this for, yes.
Is it safe to conclude that this is something that happened in the United States initiative?
Well, my understanding is that President Ortega is prepared to sit down and talk at any time, any place. I'm not sure that the United States government is also that willing. My hope is that the United States government will do that.
Any chance you might return the invitation for Ortega to visit you?
I would love. I mean, Ortega is coming to the United States for the 40th anniversary of the United Nations, and he plans to visit various cities. He is now aware of the Vermont Reds baseball team. Nicaraguans play very good baseball, and I think that any way that the American people can get up there, I think he would be delighted to do a face the people here in Burlington. Get up there, ask him questions. All I'm asking for is give the guy a chance to express his point of view.
Did you make an informal invitation to come out there?
An informal invitation.
When's that going to be?
He's coming, I think, in the fall, September, October.
Bernie, how do you react to somebody that doesn't know or care about the Sister City connection, or maybe even Nicaragua? How do you say, when they say, what does that have to do with Burlington, Vermont? How do you react to that?
What it has to do is if we don't change our policy, the kids, boys and girls of Burlington, Vermont, kids 18, 19, and 20 years old, may be dying in the jungles of Central America, fighting a war which they should not have to fight. That's how it affects Burlington, Vermont, and every other city and town in the United States of America.
Bernie, since you brought it up, and I just wanted, you brought it up, and I like this Carol El Pueblo thing a whole lot.
Yeah.
And,
I think I should do one, huh?
If I may correct you on one thing, President Reagan does not have a press conference once a year where he takes all questions from the press. He's had at least 3 this year, and I want to know how the hell come you haven't had one since your election. You have these things, but you don't even do it, and you're just saying how great Ortega is.
I agree. We had open news conferences leading up to the election, and since then we haven't had a single.
Then I will do it. All right.
Speaking of things that you brought up, first of all, would you extend the same invitation to a representative of the Indians down there?
Of the Indians, Debbie, there are hundreds of thousands of Indians. Yes, of course. I mean, why? But whom will I invite? Somebody who's part of the Contras to Burlington?
Not the Contras. There's a distinction. I mean,
sure. I think the more knowledge that you have about a situation, the better it is.
Okay. The other question is, in that regard, talking about answering back the media and stuff. One of those people, a very respected guy from Washington, from the Indian Law Resource Center, wrote to you on February 28th, expressing some of their concerns. Any reason why you never answered him back?
No reason. I will.
Mayor, aside from...
Okay, let me just, is there any other questions that the regular meeting have? Okay, yeah, did you want to, I mean, I'm sorry,
He's the regular meeting.
Are you with the Vanguard? I'm sorry. Okay.
They're not regular.
You're regular.
Semi-regular. Aside from Ortega's message that he'd be willing to meet with a member of the Reagan administration anytime, any place, did President Ortega or anybody else that you met with down there ask you to convey specific information to the American people or to the...
No, I was not a courier of any specific information.
Not privy to any information?
No, he did not say...
About U.S. involvement in...
No. By the way, if anyone is interested, I did not tape. I talked to a whole lot of people there, and I didn't tape any except one, which was a very interesting moment, a very interesting guy named Ernesto Cardinal. And it's a half-hour tape, which I think actually my tape recorder worked. And
Is he talking English?
Who is Ernesto Cardinal? He's their Minister of Culture.
Is it English?
Yeah, it's in English. He speaks English fluently.
No, just on the trip, was there ever any time you feel you were under surveillance by perhaps non-Nicaraguans?
I did not get that impression. I got through the customs
In
briefing.
terms of extending your invitation to talk to people at length, you said Vermont reporters. Would you also do that with national press?
Yeah, I'd love to. Sure.
What are your plans to get do you have any plans for getting word out on your trip to other Vermonters?
Well, I think I'm doing that today, hopefully. People listen to you and read you and watch you.
You got a thing scheduled with Montpelier came in the mail yesterday.
What?
You're going to be speaking with Beecham in Montpelier according to something that came out yesterday. From the Rainbow.
I honestly am not yet aware of that. Yeah, Stewart was down, and I mean, Stewart would be a good guy to talk to also. You know, I do think, though, that it's... The other thing, the last thing that I want to tell you, is they want Americans to come down there. Go.
I have a question. Do you feel that meeting with La Prensa was enough? I mean, in the sense of getting all the sides, you got business associations.
Yeah. The truth of the matter is, I made several calls. It was a very, very busy week, and we tried to call up. There's a free enterprise group there, and they were out. A lot of people, a lot of the opposition left the the country over that weekend, and I suspect I could have done a better job in making contact earlier. I also tried to make contact with some of the people in the church. So no, I don't think I did quite as good a job as I could have. But the 2-hour meeting with the guy from La Prensa was a very interesting meeting.
Aside from that meeting, did you meet with anybody who you would characterize as an opponent of the administration?
Sure, sure. I talked to a lot of the Ortega administration.
Yes.
Sure.
How many critics did you talk to all?
I mean, we went a lot of people, I asked people, I can't tell you how many people I spoke to, 20, 30, 40, 50, on the street. And I said, one of the questions I asked is, are things better now than they were before the revolution? The overwhelming number of people said yes. There were people who said no.
What sort of people were there?
There were poor people. There were poor people who were concerned that said that in the old days they could get products cheaper than they could right now. That was the major concern that I detected.
Did you feel that there was any sort of double standard in terms of the people affiliated with the administration enjoying a better standard of living?
I can't answer that. I think that the people, you could check up on that yourself. Ortega is not paid well. There is a maximum that government officials can earn. Certainly the discrepancy between President Reagan's salary and the average American salary will be a lot higher, I expect, than President Ortega's. I'm talking to a few people. I think the government people that I talk to were not getting paid particularly well. But that's my quick judgment. No.
In Puerto Rico, there's a lot of discontent with the Sandinista government. It was an isolated province. They were used to ruling themselves, and the Indians moved there. What kind of discontent did you find?
Okay, again, can we save that one for another time?
But did you talk with any Indians?
Yes.
You did?
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. And again, the only thing, I want to go back to my original thing. This is, I think everybody can agree, whatever else we can disagree on, it is a very complicated issue. And I am prepared any time for people to give me a ring, come in, and we'll talk about it at length. But I try to limit this discussion today because this issue itself is a long discussion. There are 15 other issues. Thank you very much.